Have you ever imagined watching a seemingly impassable sea split in two, creating a safe path between towering walls of water? What could cause such a grand and impossible event? Moses, facing an unstoppable army with no way out, didn't just challenge the circumstances, he went beyond established limits. But what really happened in that moment? And what did this miracle truly mean for a people dreaming of freedom? Today, we'll revisit this story and understand why this covenant of liberation through the Red Sea continues to resonate across generations. The Israelites' journey toward freedom was filled with challenges and hardships. After centuries of oppression under Egyptian rule, they cried out for deliverance, and it was in this time of despair that Moses became the resonant voice of God. His story begins with a divine calling, an encounter with a burning bush that, incredibly, was not consumed. In this moment, he received the mission to lead his people out of slavery and into independence. But this was no easy task. Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, was relentless, and his refusal to let the Israelites go set the stage for an epic clash between faith and tyranny. A series of extraordinary events would soon unfold. God sent a sequence of plagues upon Egypt, each one striking not only the empire's economy but also dishonoring its revered deities. Turning the Nile's waters into blood was only the beginning of a confrontation that would make it unmistakably clear where the real power lay. The following plagues, frogs, lice, flies, livestock disease, boils, hail, and locusts, not only ravaged the land but served as warnings to the oppressive nation. The final and most devastating plague, the death of the firstborns, finally broke Pharaoh's resistance, forcing him to allow the Israelites to leave. Yet, this permission did not mark the end of their challenges. On their journey, the Israelites encountered a vast barrier of water, the Red Sea, an impassable obstacle in plain sight. Despair quickly took hold of the people as they realized that this was not their only problem. The Egyptian army, enraged and determined to bring them back, was closing in quickly, while the sea stretched endlessly before them, seemingly sealing their fate. They were trapped between the sword and the water. Either way, their end seemed certain. At this critical moment, Moses' leadership and the people's trust in him were put to the test. Fear and doubt began to spread through the crowd, but the prophet's response, inspired by an unwavering faith, would trigger an event that would be remembered throughout human history. What happened next marked a powerful demonstration of how faith transcends human logic. In this tense and expectant moment, this episode reveals not only God's power but also the monumental impact it had on shaping the identity of the people of Israel. They were about to embark on a journey of self-discovery that would echo through the ages, a journey that would make them not only free but a chosen people. As the Israelites moved forward toward freedom, the echoes of their recent victory still resonated in their hearts. They had finally escaped the grip of Egyptian oppression, and the sight of the Red Sea ahead made them believe the worst was behind them. But as their hopes rose, something dark was stirring in Pharaoh's palace. The decision to let the people go had not come easily, and with each passing moment, his bitterness over losing control of those legions of slaves only grew. His pride, wounded by the plagues and the forced release of the Israelites, would not allow him to accept defeat. So Pharaoh made a fateful choice. He would gather his most powerful forces and pursue this people relentlessly. Thus, began one of the most dramatic pursuits in history. The Egyptian army, made up of the swiftest chariots and the most seasoned warriors, advanced rapidly. There was no doubt about Pharaoh's intentions. He was not merely chasing runaway slaves, he intended to re-establish his control. The gleam of weapons and the roar of wheels across the sand made it clear he was not approaching for negotiation. In the camp, fear began to grip the Israelites. The dry hills around them and the vast sea ahead offered no escape. The distant sound of chariots grew louder with each passing minute, and terror spread through the crowd. What could be done? They were trapped, unarmed, inexperienced in battle and out of options. The feeling of helplessness consumed them. The promise of freedom seemed to slip away, and doubts about Moses' leadership began to surface. Questions spread like wildfire among the people. Why did you bring us here? Wouldn't we have been better off staying in Egypt? But Moses, even in the midst of the emotional chaos, remained steadfast. he knew that this moment of tension was not the end. With his eyes fixed on the horizon, he trusted in something greater, something that transcended human despair. The Egyptian troops closed in rapidly, an overwhelming force determined to crush what little hope remained. The situation was critical. Ahead lay the relentless sea, behind, a mortal enemy. And then, when the height of despair extinguished every remaining expectation, something unexplainable happened. At the height of chaos and fear, when all seemed lost, a clear and resolute voice broke through the turmoil. Moses, confident, stood before a paralyzed people. His words, filled with authority, echoed in the heart of every Israelite. "Do not be afraid, stand firm and see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." The sea ahead, until then an impassable obstacle, was about to become the stage for one of the most extraordinary acts ever witnessed. The crowd watched with a mix of hope and uncertainty as Moses, following the command of the Lord, raised his staff over the waters. What happened next could not have been imagined by any human mind. A powerful wind began to blow, something out of the ordinary. It was nature itself responding to a higher command. The waters of the Red Sea began to stir, but not toward the shore as one would expect during a storm. Instead, they began to part, forming immense walls on each side, creating a path of dry ground right through the middle of the sea. The unfolding of this event was both surreal and magnificent, and for a moment, fear of the enemy was replaced by profound awe at what they were witnessing. But this wind did more than part the waters. It also acted as a barrier between the Israelites and the Egyptian army, creating a divide that protected the people as the miracle unfolded. The Egyptians, who had come so close, were forced to stop, unable to advance under the power of this supernatural intervention. The unseen hand at work in the chaos was clear and overwhelmingly powerful. The people of Israel, astonished, began to cross that corridor of waters with cautious steps. It was a crossing like no other. This path was no longer just their route to escape, it was a sign that even in the most impossible circumstances, there was a personal and merciful God on their side. Moses, the leader who had once faced so many doubts, now led his people not just with words, but with the very presence of the Creator by his side. As the waters stood tall like columns, the Israelites of all ages moved forward toward freedom. A barrier once insurmountable had become the passage that separated them from their oppressors. This divine intervention, silent and majestic, turned a scene of despair into an unforgettable testimony of the power of the Almighty. Once again, the impossible had become reality. With the sea divided before them, the Israelites knew there was no time to waste. Before them, a path of dry land stretched between two towering walls of water, leading them to the other side. The air was filled with a mix of wonder and fear. Each step forward felt like a challenge to reality. At the same time, the echo of the Egyptian chariots and the distant sound of the furious militia reminded them that danger was still close behind. Men, women and children, young and old, moved forward cautiously. Many carried what little they could save from their lives in Egypt, memories of a hard past that gradually transformed into hope, despite the uncertain future. Each step on the dry land between the waters was an act of faith, a silent trust that somehow they would reach the other side. Although there was no certainty about what awaited them beyond the sea, one thing was undeniable: they were not alone. The wind that had parted the waters continued to blow strongly, but not chaotically. It was controlled and precise, as if it were there to protect and guide the people along the path. With each step taken, the hearts of the Israelites raced, but something drove them to keep going. They had already witnessed so many signs, from the plagues in Egypt to the unexpected liberation, that this moment felt like the culmination of everything. They were being led by a force that transcended human understanding, and this, in a way, calmed them amid the storm of emotions. Meanwhile, the children looked at the walls of water around them with curiosity and perhaps a hint of fear, wondering how something so grand could be happening. The elders, those who had suffered throughout their lives under the weight of slavery, walked in silence, reflecting on how much the world can change in an instant. The people of Israel were finally on the brink of a new era, and this passage was the threshold between captivity and freedom. However, the threat from the Egyptians had not vanished. As the last Israelites were still crossing the path in the sea, Pharaoh's army decided to advance. With their determined chariots and warriors, they entered behind the people, confident that they could capture them. Then the scene changed. Even as it seemed that victory was within reach, the invisible force that had sustained that path began to act differently. The wheels of the chariots started to come loose, the once dry ground became unstable, and suddenly, the end of the oppressors began to come into view. As the last Israelites stepped onto dry land, crossing the miraculous corridor between the waters, the Egyptian army still advanced relentlessly, confident that they could catch them. Fast chariots tore across the ground that had been dry for a moment but was now starting to show signs of instability. The sand, once firm, began to become treacherous, and the wheels, which had rolled with strength and confidence, now sank into the soft soil. The progress that once seemed inevitable began to slow, and the Egyptian warriors, accustomed to dominating any battlefield, realized that something was terribly wrong. It was at this moment that the wind, which had blown with such precision to part the sea, began to change. The walls of water, which had stood tall for so long, trembled as if they had received a new command. Terror spread quickly among the ranks of the Egyptian forces as the men understood that they were at the mercy of a power far beyond what their muscles and weapons could fight against. The chariots began to lose control, the horses panicked, and chaos overtook the troops. The escape route that had seemed so clear was now closing rapidly, and the shouts of command mingled with cries of despair. Then, without warning, the waters released their boundaries, crashing down with overwhelming force. The liquid walls that had risen as protection for the people of Israel now transformed into an instrument of judgment against the army that had pursued them for so long. In a matter of moments, the scene changed completely. The makeshift battlefield turned into a vast expanse of turbulent waters, swallowing every chariot, every soldier, and every trace of Pharaoh's arrogance. On the other side, the people of Israel watched from a distance as the most feared army on earth at that time disappeared beneath the waves. The roar of the waters drowned out the sound of wheels and war cries, and a deathly silence descended. Much more than the destruction of an army, this was the definitive affirmation that the power that had liberated them was stronger than any human power. Now was a moment of deep reverence. They had not only crossed the sea, they had witnessed the end of those who had kept them captive and humiliated for so long. Now, with the crossing complete, the beginning of a new journey was at hand. However, the vision of the Egyptian military power being swallowed by the waters would forever be etched in Israel's memory as a poignant reminder. The power that saved them was the same power that destroyed their oppressors, and that scene in the Red Sea would remain a symbol of the ultimate liberation that the people had long awaited for centuries. When Israel found itself before the Red Sea, a difficult choice lay ahead. Around them was the relentless desert, in front, a vast body of water that seemed unbeatable, and behind them, an army determined to return them to slavery. It was an impossible situation from any human perspective. However, it was precisely in this moment of extreme vulnerability that each person's faith was put to the ultimate test. The crossing was not merely a physical and natural act, it represented something much deeper, an act of complete trust and a promise that, to the natural eye, seemed impossible to fulfill. As they were led to that seemingly desperate position, the Israelites had to confront the fear and doubt that lingered in their hearts. After many years of submission and suffering, trusting in an invisible higher power was not a simple exercise. They knew of the promises of liberation, but now they stood before an insurmountable obstacle. The command given by Moses to advance toward the sea seemed insane, an affront to reason. But it was at this point that the true meaning of faith became clear. It was not about understanding or seeing the path clearly, but about moving forward even when everything around suggested otherwise. This crossing had implications far greater than merely escaping Egypt. It became a representation that faith is not just believing in what can be seen or understood, but proceeding with courage when there are no visible guarantees. The people had to take their first steps on dry land while the walls of water rose around them, a scene that surpassed the highest degree of reasoning. Yet, as they advanced, each step took them further away from slavery, not only physical slavery but also the emotional bondage from years of oppression. It was an act of liberation in its purest and most complete form, fueled by a trust beyond what the eyes could see. The faith demonstrated there also had another essential aspect: it required action. It was not enough to simply believe, they had to move forward. Faith, in the context of that crossing, was not passive but deeply active. The sea only parted because they were willing to walk toward it. This is one of the great lessons of that event, that genuine faith calls us to act, even when the path seems uncertain. The Israelites needed to trust in the invisible, and in return, they received not only liberation but a new purpose. The reflection on this act of faith is timeless. How many times in life do we face immovable seas? Moments when the only way out seems to be to give up or return to what binds us. The Red Sea, for the people of Israel, was a literal and spiritual turning point. They crossed because they trusted, and that trust led them to freedom. As we look at this story, we are reminded that often the greatest obstacle to the next step is not outside us, but within us, in doubt, fear, and hesitation. The true act of faith is to move forward, even when the path seems to convince us of the certainty that it is impossible. The crossing of the Red Sea is not just a memorable historical event, it is a living testament to God's active involvement in the lives of His people, a clear demonstration of His ability to liberate and guide those who seek Him sincerely. When Moses raised his staff and the waters parted, a new chapter began for the Israelites, who overcame not only the oppression of Egypt but also the doubt and fear that accompanied them. The moment they crossed the sea with dry land beneath their feet and walls of water beside them, symbolized a radical transition from slavery to freedom, from a dark destiny to new hope. This divine act was not an isolated miracle, it was a turning point that shaped the identity of the Hebrew people, marking their journey as those who experienced God's salvation in a visible and dramatic way. The destruction of the Egyptian army not only sealed that liberation but also highlighted God's protection over those who trust in Him. This event echoes through generations, reminding us that true faith prepares us to cross challenges considered impossible. In a world full of uncertainties, this event shows us a God who does not merely observe but who engages in human reality, ready to intervene in our crises. The story invites us to reflect on how we respond to this involvement. Just as the Israelites were called to take a step forward, we are challenged to move forward in our own lives, trusting that even in the face of great adversity, the Most High is able to open doors where none seem to exist. The crossing also makes us think about the ongoing journey of faith. Each of us, at different moments, may feel trapped between the waters of a raging sea and the pressure of an enemy at our back. The account teaches us that even when the path seems dark and despair threatens to overwhelm us, there is a greater purpose at work. The Lord does not abandon us in our journey. He invites us to trust in His guidance and to move forward, even when we cannot see the solution. Therefore, as we consider the depth of this event, we are led to a place of reflection on our own faith journey. May the story of the crossing of the Red Sea not be merely a distant narrative but a source of encouragement and hope. In moments of crisis, as we look to our own seas to be crossed, may we remember that divine intervention is a reality, always available to those who, despite their fears, choose to move forward. This is courage. This account shows us that faith is an action, a movement toward the unknown, guided by the assurance that God is with us, opening paths and transforming destinies. Thus, each crossing becomes an opportunity for renewal, not only for us but for all who share our journey.